Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this month's event on Discover, the latest in our Discover series. As you can see from the title, this is going to be about what will transport look in 2040 with Professor Phil Blythe. So increasing digital connectivity and the rapid evolution of technology in transport are both underpinning a joining up of transport systems and services. With our speaker Phil today, we are going to look at what future transport may look like in 2040. And we're going to have a particular consideration around ideas such as decarbonisation, mobility for an ageing population, and things like how a smart city, how electromobility may have an impact on what transport may look like. Professor Phil Blythe, who is our speaker today, is the Professor of Intelligent Transport Systems and served as the Director of the Transport Operations Research Group at Newcastle for 13 years until he stepped down to take a post in 2015, working as the Chief Scientific Advisor for DFT. And without any further ado, I'm going to pass on to Phil.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. I'll just bring my slides up. There we go. And hopefully make it full screen. Can everybody see that? Is that good? Okay. Hi everybody. Great to be here. As Jeremy says, my name's Phil Blythe. I'm currently in Whitley Bay, just off the coast from Newcastle, and I'm Professor of Intelligent Transport Systems and the Director of the NewCore, the Newcastle University Centre of Research Excellence in Mobility and Transport, which actually kicks off its launch meeting on 5th of May next week. So I'm electronic and communication engineer by first degree, and I was appointed to the academic staff in '99 and to a chair of intelligent transport in 2003. From 2015 to 2021, I had the honor to be Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department for Transport. And there I led on all things science, technology, engineering, and futures for the department, and dealt with all science across the departments, including being part of SAGE for COVID and the like. So that was an interesting time because all the ministers have different views on what the future should be, and particularly where we should be really making sexy future transport in the portfolio that they've been allocated. The department has a different view because it doesn't want ministers to be that excited because it costs money and it creates additional hard work. So they want to have a much more coordinated approach, and that coordinated approach was through a thing called Future Mobility, which I led. Department covers all sorts of things. You don't need to read this just to get an idea that these are all the directors. So it's actually a very, very big department. But what's important is, as a university, we cover so much of what the department does, all the really exciting and future-y things. So as a university, I think we've got a lot to play in terms of helping to deliver government, the world, the challenges of future mobility and making the world better through enhancing transport systems and enhancing the mobility of individuals and businesses and how we ship goods. So I'm not going to cover everything that could happen in transport in 2040 rather. I'm really focusing on the things that I think the university has a key role to play, and I'm going to give you some examples of what we do. But I'd like to just set the scene around that. There's lots of new things coming. Obviously, electrification is now mainstream. The objectives of government that by 2030, you will not be able to buy a petrol or diesel car, only a zero tailpipe emission car. There's a transition period of about 5 years to 2035 where you can still buy a plug-in hybrid. But after that, all petrol and diesel cars have gone. So big challenges there. Big challenges on big investments that they've done in things like high-speed rail. Flying cars, drones, those technologies are coming. And so much is being enabled through connectivity, digital connectivity, big data, all the sensors that we have, that we can really think about doing transport differently. And that's a challenge because in many cases, transport is thought of in single modes. You invest in buses, you invest in lorries, you invest in cars, you invest in trains, planes, aviation and maritime. But to really get the best out of this, we want to try and join this up as much as possible. And that's where the connectivity becomes a very important part of that. What's driving us? Many things. We want to have innovation. We want our university and other universities to really innovate. And to do that, you need to understand what the challenges are that we're innovating against. So we're delivering things that are useful and usable and user-centric. And I think that's really important. We obviously also want to look at the fundamentals, the blue sky research, the lower technology readiness levels, which are the foundations for the solutions that we find. We realize that it's not all technology. Behavior and nudging and informing people to do things differently are critically important. And I'll come on to this a little bit later, because I think one of the critical flaws of the COP26 meeting last autumn was governments around the world seem to suggest that technology would solve all our decarbonisation problems and you won't have to do things differently. I think the scale of transition is way above that. So we'll touch on that later. The other big challenge is making sure that we're resilient to both human interventions in the system and natural shocks created in many cases through the through climate change, and also around the world, increasing urbanization, more and more people moving to big towns and cities, and the pressures that put on the resources in those towns and cities, and the pressure it puts on transport and logistics, massive. So if we try and unravel this in terms of what we think government policies are talking about at the moment, you hear these from the politicians on a regular basis: levelling up. This is a recognition that investments in transport have really been focused in certain areas in the UK, particularly in the southeast, where most of the economy is and the like. And the investment in transport systems and services outside of there, and particularly in the northeast, has been particularly poor. They want to try and redress that. And I think that's critically important, because if you think about what transport and mobility means in its raw form, it gives an individual a sort of a circle, a radius of opportunity, whether that be to find work and employment, whether that be for education, training, or just social activities. And if your transport is better and relatively cheap, that radius is bigger. So the opportunities that you have before you and the quality of your life and well-being is better. So I think that's really, really important, that we think about how we can do transport better in places where that investment hasn't been. And we work with the regional authorities, Transport for the Northeast, with the local cities, and with the mayors, to work out how we can do things better. There's also that build back better. One of Boris's great 3Bs phrases that he always loves. And that is really, coming back out of COVID, we're going to invest in infrastructure, we're going to invest in new technologies, particularly green tech. How can we do things better? And again, that's a real challenge. What have we learned from the past? What can we do to improve things? And things like maybe not building as many roads, and maybe keeping some of the road space that cities repurposed for walking, cycling, and social distancing and micromobility during COVID, maybe keep that to make towns and cities less congested, less polluted, and healthier places to be. Clearly, decarbonisation of transport and its role in leading to net zero, which we have a legal obligation to by 2050, is critical, and we'll touch on that in a big way later. And related to that, I think this is one of the real strengths of our university, is that nexus between energy and transport. If we're going to decarbonise using electricity, using hydrogen or other decarbonised liquid fuels, how do we make sure that we make them in the right quantities, get them in the right places, so that transport can benefit from them, and other sectors that need them too? And I think that really close relationship we have in that at Newcastle University is a very, very important thing for us. And the big question is, how do we get there? What is the direction of travel? So I'm going to take you through some thinking behind that now. The first thing is technology is changing. Automation has a massive role to play in all sorts of things, from IT systems through to logistics and delivery, through to many other sectors, like the annoying thing that you can't get hold of a person on a phone anymore, you get some automated voice. But automation has a real role to play in transport as well, in making modes driverless, automated. In theory, you can improve the efficiencies doing that, and you can get other benefits as well. Cleaner technology, cleaner transport, absolutely at the heart of what we need to think about. And the DfT produced their decarbonisation strategy in 2021, which the university responded to the consultation, has really set up a lot of structures in place to make sure we are well placed to deliver on that and support that. New modes of transport arriving all the time. Some are just on the horizon. Some that were on the horizon are here now, like mobility scooters, like even drones and dare I say, flying cars. We're also recognizing that consumer attitudes are changing. Younger people are not learning to drive as much, but they are still using a lot of transport services, as well as doing a lot of their social interaction and professional interaction online. Shared mobility enabled by new business models and data connectivity is also interesting, because it might be a way of reducing the amount of transport we need to offer to get people from A to B, because they're more willing to share things. And that's why I think making sure we design public transport services of the future well, with good information services to plan those A to B and C journeys, is critical. And this is changing. So how do we deliver the transport? What are the demands for that transport are really important. And that's important because then when you think about investments at the national level or in our region, it's, do we still need to build lots of new concrete and steel civil infrastructure? I mean, I'm in a civil engineering department, so the answer is yes, we like doing that. But could it mean that we do more investment in digital infrastructure and things to support smarter transport and smarter cities? What regulations needed to make that work properly? That's critical. That's a role for government. We can inform that by saying, we're thinking about this as a new transport mode or this new way of doing things. It'll only work if you enable it through regulation. And also, trust, cybersecurity. The new core of cybersecurity launched 2 weeks ago, and that's really, really important to ensuring that if we are going to rely on digital connectivity, we're going to rely on big data and IoT, that it is protected from cyber attack, and we have trusted systems. When I was a kid, you think about future transport, there were magazines and books and everything to get you really excited about what the future would look like. Would we have flying cars? Would we live in the stars like Captain Scarlet's cloud-based Alpha and the like? And interesting predictions that if you look at that future city thing, we'd be living in space in colonies. We'll be having solar heated houses, which seems to be a really important thing in the future, although we delivered that many, many years ago. And we'll have zero gravity sports, and we might have television on our watches. What they didn't get is the mobile communications to a large degree, and how much that would really change and enable a new thinking in transport. So, as a professor of transport, what I really want to understand is all these rapid advancements from automation, digital connectivity, IoT, means that transport's on the cusp of something really, really exciting. And we're going to have smarter transport, we're going to have smarter cities. What role can Newcastle play in helping to deliver that? And how do we want to deliver it and shape it in a way that it lands well? So these transport systems of the future, these decarbonised transport services actually work and deliver what they're supposed to do, and that's critically important. So it's got to be remembered, it's not just the technology, it's making sure that we understand that user-centric point and that societal point of view as well. And when we think about that digital connectivity, we've got all those great buzzwords of big data, cyberspace, cloud, IoT, etc. And that's enabled loads of things. And I think through things like National Innovation Centre for Data, we are really at the forefront of that. And essentially what it means is we've got that lot of digital connectivity, a lot of data, and a lot of sensing, which underpins much of what we need in transport. One of the words I invented to try and explain why we need to have that connectivity is desilification, taking ourselves out of silos and joining ourselves up into smart city. That on the left is not what we want. And I think there's a massive amount of thinking going on at the university about how can we join all these things together, and bringing all the different disciplines, all the different sciences and social sciences and medicine together to really work out how can we bring all this together so we can understand people, understand transport, understand how we can make their experiences better, healthier, and with well-being and satisfaction. And to do that, we've got things like the Urban Observatory, which to me is the best example of a smart city infrastructure in the UK. Operated out the Urban Science Building at the university, it has thousands of sensors across Newcastle measuring air pollution, weather, what pedestrians are doing. Are they social distance even during the COVID? They could tell me whether they were two meters apart, and all sorts of other things. And by looking at all the warts and all challenges around what all this data being brought together in the Urban Observatory is, we better understand how that data can be used, and all these inferences in the data that we would not have worked out, that data from 4 or 5 different sources can tell us something completely different. So we can understand how the transport system's running, how we can inform people to make smarter and better service choices on using that transport, maybe nudge them to make more sustainable choices, and also critically understand the impact of current transport and future transport on the environment, and cost that in. I certainly think pay as you travel in all modes, including roads, will happen within the next 10 years. And what that would enable is a thing called mobility as a service, the ability to decide how you go from A to B and almost be agnostic. You'll have a smart travel agent that will understand what you like, what you don't like, what you're willing to pay, the green footprint you would like, and let them organize your transport from A to B to get you at the time there you need, in a level of comfort you're willing to pay for, and at a level of emissions that you're willing to accept, rather than having a car that you own or a particular mode that you always use. It could help you find different ways of doing this and smarter, but that's all based on information. The next area, which I think will become quite prevalent, is automation. Making sense of the environment, whether you're in a plane, in a ship, in a train, or on the road, to be able to operate your transport autonomously without any intervention from the driver, has been an area of research at the university for a long, long time. And clearly, all the car manufacturers, what we call the OEMs, have been putting a lot of investment in this area. And we're seeing real cost benefits where it's been implemented. We're seeing bridgeless ships on the motorways of the sea without any crew operating it on an hour-by-hour basis there if the intervention is needed. We're beginning to see that happen with platooning vehicles on motorways, and I think we'll see things like smart pods, which will take you around urban areas, city areas, without having a driver in them, coming in the not too distant future, certainly in the next 10 years. The university is doing an awful lot of work in that space, a lot on the data security, a lot on the on all the AI and smart thinking around this. But we also have some quite substantive projects where we're turning this into reality. And one of the really interesting ones is a project called 5G CAL, Connected Autonomous Logistics, where we're working with Nissan, with Street Drone, with the Automotive Alliance in the Northeast and the City Council to develop a completely driverless electric tractor, which is the thing on the top right-hand side, which can pull up to a 40-ton load. And the idea is that once it's finally developed, you'll be able to take loads from the logistics companies around Nissan that use private roads and take those loads directly into Nissan. There's between 100 and 150 of those sort of movements a day. And if they could be automated, it increases resilience and the like. And if there's parts of the journey, like reversing into the garage so the load can be unloaded, that can be done by a driver remotely from the logistics company through teleoperations and 5G. So that's really interesting, and that's being also used to inform on lots of other automation projects around the UK at the moment. Another area where there's great future technology is sticking our freight underground. Now, it seems crazy. You should go to a city like London. We've got all these beautiful sites, above ground, and yet we shove most of the people onto metros and tubes underground and allow the freight and everything else to go above ground. Let's see if, as we design new cities and design new structures, we can replace this. So we've got people like Mole and Hyperloop all looking at putting freight underground. So you have freight pipelines underground, and that enables above ground to be used for useful and pleasant transport for individuals. The university is doing a lot of work in this space through our future mobility group, through the maritime team and the like, to look how this can become a reality and develop prototypes of this and help to develop the operations of how you actually get freight on and off these things, and also understand the economics of it. The other side of future freight is I think you'll see drones and urban aviation being used to move stuff around cities. And we're doing quite a lot of work in this space, particularly in electrical engineering and the like, looking at how they can develop both electric and hydrogen powertrains for vehicles. Some of my students and PhDs are looking at how would urban airports work, maybe built above railway stations in urban areas where you've got zero emission, vertical or short takeoff aircraft, which will provide city to city connectivity, whereas you might have flying taxis that will provide connectivity around the city. These things exist. These things are actually flying around at the moment. I've flown in one in Singapore, and we're also seeing that great thing for future science, the flying car. The one on the right is a flying car that does really fly. It was certified by the CAA in Slovakia last year. So there's a whole new generation of transport coming along. How much it will be used in the UK, I don't know at the moment, but there's quite a lot of activity going on there. And the other side of it, how can we improve future mobility? And there was a future mobility strategy which the university really contributed to, looking at how micromobility, such as electric scooters, the thing in the middle is a cargo robot, which is owned by the National Innovation Centre for Aging here at the university, to see how it potentially could be used to encourage older people to travel more. So there's a whole raft of questions around how do we design future mobility and urban mobility, and the design of the infrastructure, the design of the parkscapes and the landscapes as well are critically important to give you a much nicer environment. And that would really help with leveling up. When you think about things like the reopening of the Blythe to Ashington railway line, let's make sure that all these stations along there are future mobility ready and can help deliver a much better traveling experience. Having automated public transport, bringing people from the other end of the town to this station so they use public transport and don't choose to take their car into whatever journey they need. The second part of what we need to do is clearly think about decarbonisation. Transport is the sector on the naughty step at the moment. About 30% of domestic emissions come from the transport sector. And that's not because the sector hasn't cleaned itself up. It has a little bit, but there's more and more transport happening. But most importantly, if you look at the bar charts at the bottom, out of the domestic emissions, just under 90% of them come from road transport. So if we can solve the road transport problem, we've got a good low-hanging fruit. And the university has been involved in electromobility, new energy vectors for transport for much more than a decade now. Yeah, we're one of the go-to places for government, for people to get advice, and for developing the new technologies. The decarbonisation transport plan was published by the Department for Transport last year in July. I wrote quite a lot of that, or particularly science and technology stuff, where we said you need to think about the behavioral. You cannot just think about the technology, but you also need to think beyond electric, which is where most governments are at the moment. We need to think about things like hydrogen. And Grant Shapps, the Secretary of State for Transport, he really summed up the problems with COP. It's not about stopping doing things, it's about doing things differently. He's forgetting that technology will take us so far, but there is a real need to change behavior to achieve that scale of transition if we're going to meet a 2050 objective. And this is just one example why it's so challenging. This is a graph from a colleague at Birmingham. The blue line is showing the use of natural gas. And as you see, it's very cyclic and there's a lot of it. and it's cyclic, we use more in the winter. The red line is the use of electricity, the consumption of electricity in the country. And the grey line in between is the energy used by transport, mainly liquid fuels. As you can see, it's almost double the amount of electricity that's currently generated in the country. So the challenge in making the energy system deliver for the transport system as we decarbonize is absolutely massive. And we're really focused on that through the Centre of Energy Systems Integration here at the university and the new award they've just had to coordinate hydrogen. We're doing a great deal in this. We understand how people drive, how they recharge, what level of charge they have in batteries when they choose to recharge. So that really informs on where we can have charging points and the type of charging point. We've also installed a rapid charging filling station at the university where up to 6 vehicles can recharge with 50 kilowatt chargers at the same time, and we can understand their behavior to help inform. We're leading a lot of the technology for the bits and pieces that go into the vehicle, such as power electronics and electric drive through Driving the Electric Revolution, and through battery through the Faraday Institution, who only have one hub outside their main centre, and that is the Northeast Hub at Newcastle University. We have colleagues at the university, Zero Carbon Futures, who are really helping all the local authorities to understand what charging infrastructure they need to go forward. And then we have hydrogen. I was a lone voice in the DFT for hydrogen for a long time, and then it began to connect to people that you can't electrify everything. Lots of heavy goods vehicles could be electric, carrying 3 tons of batteries around with them, that actually you need to find the energy to move those batteries before you actually do anything useful with the vehicle. So hydrogen's come much, much more on the agenda, and the university's really stepped up to support that. We have projects looking at hydrogen aviation at the moment. We have projects looking at hydrogen road transport, freight transport. And in the top left is a Royal Air Force aircraft tug at RAF Leeming. And one of the pieces of work we're doing at the moment, it's part of making RAF Leeming the sustainable living lab for the RAF through the Vital project. In another project, we are actually looking at with our industrial partners, converting that diesel tug to run on hydrogen actually in the engine. So instead of having a hydrogen fuel cell generate electricity for drives on the wheels, as we have with the Hydroflex train, it will run on the diesel engine. So at the moment, we actually got lots of equipment working with our partners to actually measure the emissions from that, to show that if you burn hydrogen and you make the engine properly and all the processes there, you can have a zero emission hydrogen engine. And that's a real game changer, because that means you can convert a lot of vehicles to run on hydrogen rather than diesel, rather than have to replace those vehicles by new vehicles. Because all these old vehicles that are already out there, they've already got their embedded carbon in their manufacturing. So I think that's a real game changer. So look, that's some of the things we're doing. What I would say is, obviously it's impossible to predict the future, but I think we have a lot of tools to deliver on things like automation, on all the areas of decarbonisation, on smart thinking around what will urban transport look like, what will urban aviation look like in the future, and the role of doing things differently about how we move people, and through freight, how we move goods as well. I think the role we're playing in things like automation, and also the work we're doing in automation on things like cyber security and cyber resilience, is absolutely critical. And I think what's important is what we have at the university through all our faculties and all our schools and all the new cores, is we understand transport and mobility, not just from what the science and engineering needs are for the future, but also what society needs, so we can tackle inequality, access to transport, and transport poverty, people being too poor to travel. And I think with the increasing costs of fuels at the moment, that's going to become a significant problem going forward. When we think about changing presumptions, in 1955, that was the start of the space age, Sputnik was launched. Transport was really for the rich. Not many people traveled a lot. By 2000, in the information age, transport was enabled for everybody. So everybody felt they had the right to move and could afford to move. If we look 45 years on rather than 45 years back from 2000, I think it'll be more intelligent. We'll be smarter about thinking about movement, and it'll be more about, should I move or can I do things differently? And I think that's critically important. And we will be moving, I hope, towards a post-fossil fuel world. I don't think we'll be there yet, but we're getting there. But just as a final point, as a professor, I need to warn you, technology is not always the solution. There are other ways of doing things. And it's good to think outside the box. This is a bridge in Canada where they want to slow vehicles going onto it. So they put printed things on there. It made it look like there's potholes, got people to slow down, but they were just printed on top. Just a different way of doing things. Northeast has always been a hub for innovation, a hub for transport, and we really want to make transport fit for the 21st century, with Newcastle University being a leader in helping to make that happen. And to finish that off, just to say that our new call on transport and mobility, where our three key themes are pathways to decarbonisation, technology, transport, society and space, which has really engaged schools from across the university, some of which never realised they had any relationship to transport and mobility before. And this mobility new call will be launched next week on Thursday, 5th of May. And Jeremy, I'll finish there.
Phil, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. I have a ton of questions just from me, let alone all the ones that have been submitted. I'm fascinated by the idea of pay as you travel across all modes of transport. I hadn't really thought about that before, but it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, thank you. I think there's loads of stuff to unpack in that. So I'll move into some of the questions that we've been asked. There were two that came up during some of the comments you were making in your presentation. One of which is, I know something that's grappled with already. I know there's an issue at Newcastle as a city currently, which is the paradox is city dwellers in apartments, multi-occupational houses, basically built up urban areas are the places that tend to benefit the most from electric vehicles, electric cars specifically for shorter journeys. But they're also the ones that are most unlikely to have access to those personal charging points. So what do you think is kind of the way that to solve that? Is that information? Is it technology? Or is it just infrastructure? Or is it a mixture?
It's a real challenge because, you know, if you've got a house with a drive or a garage or whatever, it's quite easy to have your own personal charging. But if you're talking about urban living in apartment blocks, in high-rise blocks, or in terraced houses, you don't. And this is one of the areas where I think government has not gone far enough in actually thinking what the actual solutions are. And I think it's an area that Zero Carbon Futures and ourselves have been actually trying to help government and local authority think about it. We've talked about proposals like having EV car parks where you can park overnight and charge. The electrical guys have been looking at inductive and conductive charging, where you park on the road and you don't have any wires coming out your car. You induct power into the car while they're parked, like you do with some mobile phones, with your kettle, with your iron. There's a long way to go, and obviously the amounts of power that needs to be transferred are quite large. Other things have been looking at you couple power while you're driving, again through inductive loops under the road or through conductive loops, almost like Scalextric. And I showed one slide of this, or one part of the slide. The DFT, as I say, are quite focused, and many governments are only focusing on electromobility and not so much on hydrogen. So they even think about bloody-minded things about having catenaries, basically electric wires above the road on motorways that the lorries can connect to and trickle charge. We're not very good at making electric wires in the UK. They fall down quite a lot. And could you imagine on a motorway if one falls down, the health and safety, you'd shut the motorway for an hour while you make sure you recover the wire and there's no electricity there and it's safe. Just think about the cost to society of hundreds and thousands of cars actually queuing while they're waiting for the road to be recovered. So I think there's got to be other solutions. I think this is part of the tipping point of where does hydrogen make sense for longer distance and larger vehicles rather than electric. But that consumer thing about how do we deal with charging for urban people living in the urban areas who don't have a dedicated parking space or drive is still a really open area. I think it's one of the areas of research that we really do need to achieve. Because if by 2030 you can't buy a new petrol or diesel car, you are going to end up using cars. Although what I would say, my own preference is we have less cars on the road. We don't replace every metal box that was petrol or diesel car by a metal box that's electric or hydrogen. And you start thinking about using more sustainable forms of transport like public transport. And that means making public transport much more relevant. And there's a lot of work needs to go into that space too.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's fairly ironic that the only place where public transport seems to be really successful is the place where it's not privatized. But I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole separate conversation. I think it is really interesting to hear the idea that they're going to have electric wires over the motorway. We already don't produce enough energy in the current national grid, so adding more wires to that to charge stuff seems to be
a
idea. But
my professional view on that at the DFT when they announced we could do a trial, as you said, bonkers.
Yeah,
I could be proven wrong. There's trials running on that in Germany at the moment by Siemens, but I think the practicality is pretty challenging.
I can imagine. To sort of flip the question, which is something that's come through the Q&A, which is that's, we talk a lot about built up urban areas, and I know there's a trend for increasing urbanization in populations, but how is this stuff going to roll out to rural areas? But it's a very different conversation for much more rural populations, hard to reach and much more spread out. So is that again a conversation between electricity versus hydrogen for longer journeys?
Okay, that's an interesting question. If you saw on my urban mobility slide, I did actually say, what about the rural? Because it always gets forgotten. And they are supposed to be producing a rural strategy. Number of comments there. First of all, we tried to get, as a region, players to come into the region and develop an app like the City App app that's in London. And they would only do it they're only interested in doing it for urban environments. They don't see the value in doing it for rural because there aren't so many people. They're not going to make the money out of it. And that's a big problem with innovation. Innovators want to make money and returns on investment quickly. And so they focus on the urban areas. In the rural areas, there is transport poverty. And also this trend that a lot of poorer and older people end up living in the rural area and the younger people tend to move into the urban areas. So getting public transport right is really important. And this is where I think using smart information, you can do public transport that doesn't follow an exact route. It follows the route that people need for the day, which I think is important, but also the role automation could play, because the biggest cost of public transport is the driver. If you could have some form of automated public transport, maybe bringing people towards a hub where maybe there's bigger vehicles that will take them, or trains, ideally, or buses. And so rural automation is really, really an interesting concept. And we've spoken to a lot of people about this. We've done surveys with older people, and they're happy not to have a driver in the cab. They will trust the technology. It won't be out there unless it works. But what they want maybe some community volunteers on that bus or that transport that can help them carry their shopping on, to help them on, and also just to make them feel more comfortable and to have some social interaction. So there's a whole raft of potential ways we could change rural transport. I mentioned the Blythe-Ashington line. If we make the stations there future mobility ready, maybe we can have these automated buses bringing people from the periphery to those stations and give them the connectivity that they want. And I also think this is where hydrogen may have a role to play. Hydrogen can be produced in lots of different ways, from renewables, through electrolysis, basically the cracking of water, through anaerobic digestion, and like things that farms and rural communities could possibly put together themselves. And when you think about off-road transport, tractors, construction, mining stuff, they're very high torque activities where I don't think batteries will work. So we've been talking to people like JCB about the role that hydrogen could play in that future transport as well. So there's a big rethink. The things that are needed, I think, are getting innovators to realize there's real value and real social value in solving problems in that rural community. Understanding what the requirements are. I can't guess. I live in Whitley Bay. So we've got to make sure that it's user-centric. And also making sure it's coordinated, because if lots of areas do it, then the cost of stuff reduces because lots of people are doing it, rather than you have one little siloed thing here, another completely different siloed thing over there. You're never going to get the cost basis together.
Yeah, and I think it's something that's interesting is it's never taken, you can't ever take it in isolation. It's not, well, we need to automate the bus to go out to the rural villages. It's, well, okay, who lives out there? It's harder for them to get the transport because it tends to be older, so they need extra help for everything else. And that kind of joined up thinking is something that's important.
Sorry, and the last bit I meant to say, you need connectivity. You need the 4G and maybe in the future 5G to do that. You go to parts of Norfolk and we're talking about 3G and someone put their hand up and says, I can't even get FM radio where I live, so we've got to be aware that there are some real challenges with that.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree. There's been two or three questions that have cropped up that are all about EV charging and batteries. So I'll try and bring them all together if it's possible. Which is when with the increase in electric vehicle charging, do you think it's going to require an increase in charging points at homes and employers and businesses? Or are they going to go down the replaceable battery route so that you might not have to charge your car all the time? You can just take your battery out and charge it and then swap it, and the batteries become public use. Yeah. I guess linked to that, which is a related question, is if that's going to be the case, is battery technology vulnerable? So things like limits on lithium and how much nickel cadmium is used in car batteries, and is that going to have an impact if they go down that route as well? So I guess those two kind of battery charging questions have come up together.
Okay, I'll start with the latter. Yeah, obviously batteries use lithium, cobalt, nickel, and many other things in their design, all of which are not widely available. Then they're not necessarily small amounts, but they're in places sometimes it's actually hard to get. So being aware of the resources needed for electric batteries is important. And we have the Faraday Institution, which is like the Center of Excellence for batteries, looking at new technologies that could actually mean that we can use more simpler materials to make the batteries. They haven't actually got there yet, but they're working very hard. I think the other important thing with batteries, the current generation of lithium-ion batteries are nearly impossible to recycle. You can probably scavenge 10, maybe 15% of the materials out of it. So another thing that is being done, and researchers here are part of that, is looking at how future batteries could be made in a way that they can be disassembled, so much more of it can be recycled. And the other aspect of that is recycling takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort. There are lots of interesting second uses of electric batteries, like supporting the rural environment, have big battery packs there, using them for vehicle to grid storage when there's maybe more constrained electricity being generated than you need. So there's lots of work going on in that space. Going back to batteries in general, batteries have technology and cost of batteries have significantly improved. In 2009, when government decided they were going to go down the electromobility route, first of all, the electricity network in the UK was very dirty. The average grams of CO2 in 1 kilowatt hour of electricity generated was about 450 grams.
Yeah.
One kilowatt hour of electric battery storage would cost you $1,500. So if you think about 20 kilowatt hours storage, that was $30,000 additional dollars on the cost of your car. Now it's less than $200 per kilowatt hour. So innovation is really helping, and the university has been involved in all sorts of ways around that. The other thing that has changed is the amount of batteries, therefore the storage of the batteries, therefore the range of the vehicle has increased, as we're seeing batteries go from 10 kilowatt hour packs to 20 kilowatt hour, up to 40, 60 kilowatt hours as we see now.
Yeah.
So the charging behavior will change, because people won't need to charge as often unless they're running really, really long distances. But we don't understand that charging behavior. In the early days, the Northeast had the biggest EV charging network in the UK. And we had big projects funded by government and funded by the car manufacturers, where we put data loggers on the vehicles so we can understand how people were driving, where they're driving from, when they recharged, what the state of the charge of the battery was before and after. So we really understood the charging behavior and also really understood the demands on the electricity network. Those trials aren't going on anymore, and it's something we have a real ambition to try and do in the region, because now you've got vehicles with 60 kilowatt hour. Their recharging behavior is going to be very different. Are you going to just charge at work? Are you going to charge at home? Are you going to charge at a public charger? How often do you need to do that? And that will inform the business case for investment in the charging infrastructure.
Yeah.
Now, the other challenge there is if you only got a car you're going to use for urban use, why on earth would you want 60 kilowatt hours of batteries and carry all that weight around with you? Because that is really inefficient. So thinking about horses for courses and making sure you're designing small electric vehicles for the urban area and bigger ones where people need more robust use cases are really, really important. And I'm not sure the OEMs, the car manufacturers, have really got that yet. So again, this is a whole area of research that I think the university can help them think about. And that's really challenging because the body responsible for electromobility at government level is Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, which is a joint body between DFT and the Department for Business and Energy, BEIS. And they just see this point that you'll get to a point where the cost of electric vehicle is less than the cost of ICE and people are going to buy electric vehicles. Yeah. That's not going to happen. It's much, much more complex decision making than that. And I think there's a lot of work to do in that space. And I think the expertise we have here will help with that. Has that answered the question?
Yes, yeah,
okay.
I think so. And I think there's a whole conversation which we have absolutely no time to get into, which is, as you've mentioned before, the complication of new technologies like hydrogen and others, which is, well, why are you buying a 60 kilowatt car that can do 300 miles when you could buy a hydrogen car that does the same for less? And then where's the limitations between urban versus rural and long distance? So that's a whole complication. I'm aware we've only got 10 minutes left and there's loads of questions, so I'll try and cherry pick a couple. So I know you mentioned something about the idea of switching people around from underground transport for people and overground transport for freight and reversing that process. So is it, I guess the question is, would it just be like a straight swap? Would that be the idea? So you just move the freight down to the underground and the people back up top and just replace the infrastructure? Or is it a completely new way of looking at it?
It's really, really complicated because moving people underground in tube trains and the like is mass rapid transit, and it works very, very well. But when you think about the ludicrousy of that, that means that above ground, you've got all your lorries and everything else moving around. And wouldn't it be much nicer as environments the other way around? So this is why these companies have evolved. You think about Hyperloop. It's been around for a number of years, original concept from Elon Musk. He saw it as something that could be used for passengers. They've realized now that's really complicated. So they've badged Virgin Hyperloop are really looking at the freight opportunities there.
Yeah,
and that would be above and below ground. But other companies such as Mole that have been around for a long time are working in China on a number of projects where they're building new cities. China just goes out and builds a new city. They may not get any residents for 20 years, but they will build the city ready for when they need it. And they are looking at these sort of opportunities. This isn't new, you know. We used to have freight underground from the university down to, if there's tunnels from the university all the way down to the docks, the quayside in Newcastle, where freight used to move. In London, there's a museum underground, which is the old GPO, General Post Office train tunnels, which were for moving all the letters underground. Really effective freight. We moved away from that because it was seen as too expensive and clunky. Maybe we need to think about moving back so we can keep our beautiful above ground space for us to enjoy and make it more, just a more pleasant place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can do the Victorian Tunnel experience here. It's just outside the building I'm sat at.
I've never done it. I really want to do that one day.
They can go down. So I completely agree. It's interesting that one's almost a step back, not as a step forward. It's, well, we used to do this, so let's go back to it, but in a new way. I think we might have time for two more questions. So one of the questions that's come through is, are there any proposals, or what are the proposals around removing or reducing road haulage? Is that to look increasingly at rail or even canals, because we've got a lot of canals in the UK, or is that not really part of the plan? Is it just, well, we'll just make road haulage more efficient with electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles?
I mean, there is so much road haulage. It's a real challenge. I personally think there's got to be an opportunity to look at road haulage on short sea shipping and on on canals. Getting more on the railways is challenging. Railways don't really like freight because it does disproportionate amounts of damage, but we've got to look at a way of trying to just make things more efficient. Automation may have a role to play, because you could see these road trains where the vehicle in the front is being driven and all the other ones are connected behind, which could squeeze more vehicles into the space.
Yeah.
And there's quite a lot of work going on that space at the moment. But the amount of goods we move around is crazy, and it's grown a lot, even in lockdown, as White Van Man was delivering more and more stuff to our place. So if we can rationalize it so there's no empty lorries, no empty vans, they're all consolidated and done well, I think that's important. Having consolidation centers that work. This is where all the freight maybe come into an area outside the city, whether it's coming waterborne, air, land, road-based or rail, and then the goods coming into cities are brought in by really nice, sustainable, quiet transport. That would be great. I know the city has looked at it. It hasn't worked up to now, but these are concepts I think we need to look at in the future, because it's not just about moving people, it's about moving freight more effectively and efficiently as well. And it's absolutely bonkers what we do at a few years ago. We were looking in Phoenix in Newcastle to buy a new settee. It was made in Italy, but the frame's made in Italy. The materials are then sent over to China to be assembled, and then they're brought back.
Yeah.
This is the ludicrousy of the global supply chain. We've got to get away from that. We've got to actually know what the travel miles is of all our goods, so we can make more informed decisions. It's just ludicrousy. And I know that sovereign capability and bringing things more onshore to be more resilient is a big consideration by all of us now in society with the things that are happening at the moment. I think we need to look at more of that. It's critically important.
I agree. I think wasn't it that story that came out a little while back that you'd have to drive your Prius for an average of 8 years to recoup the carbon footprint, because they have to ship the car all the way to China for the cadmium battery and then all the way back again. So like, actually your car its carbon footprint is bigger than just buying a car that's
I mean that is a challenge. I mean, I think the embedded carbon in the manufacture of a electric vehicle is about eight tons of carbon, whereas the equivalent petrol vehicle, if it's built in the local area, is about 5.5 tons. So yeah, there's but that's also due to the batteries and the energy.
Yeah,
but these are all things we need to consider more and need to understand more. And there's some great projects going on at the university trying to understand that. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I agree. And to the point that you made about the sort of the on the edge of town centers to bring stuff in, it surprised me that there isn't more about that. We've got like the port, like for Newcastle, there's the Port of Tyne. That's lots of space that isn't used anymore because it's not the port it used to be, and you just think it's a prime place to go. Well, it's already a transport hub. So
the problem, all these things cost.
Yes,
puts additional cost on everything, and again, this is part of the fallacy of COP26. It'll be all right. Technology will solve all our problems. It's a sad fact of life that if we really want to achieve net zero, it's going to cost us to do things differently, and there's going to be an intrinsic cost with it. Whether the individual pays it, whether the business pays it, or whether government pays it, it's a big question. And one of the big challenges is the cost of carbon, as is calculated by economists in government and economists around the world, is too low. So a lot of investment in new decarbonized ways of doing things don't stack up, because the cost of carbon that they're comparing it against doesn't actually make the return investment work.
Yeah,
and that's something we need to look at.
I do think it's something that is it's all nice. It's a nice thing to say, but it feels a bit of an empty platitude. Oh, technology will solve it. Who's paying for the technology? Well,
it's
somebody will pay for it.
Way.
Yeah, it's an odd one. I'm gonna stop there because I've still got 25 questions that we've not even got anywhere close to, and we're already an hour in. And to be honest, I could sit here and talk to you for the rest of the afternoon, which wouldn't do any of us any good. Thank you, Phil, so much for your time, for your hour, for all your knowledge and your expertise. It's been absolutely fascinating. Really interesting. I've come away with probably more questions than answers, but I think that's what these things are about. If for everybody who's attended, thank you so much for giving up your time over lunch to attend. Please, can you just complete the feedback poll that we've put up, just to let us know how you feel about these events going forwards. It gives us a good idea of what we need to do. And all that's left for me to say is, again, Phil, thank you so much. It's been really interesting. And for everybody else to enjoy the rest of their day.
Okay, thank you. My pleasure.